The first time my daughter told me not to come to her wedding, I thought I had misheard her. Her voice was calm, steady even, but her words pierced through me like shards of glass. Dada, don't come to my wedding. Just like that. No hesitation, no explanation. The girl whose tiny fingers once clutched mine, while crossing the street, the girl whose scraped knees I'd bandaged, whose nightmares I'd soothed, now looked me in the eye and told me I wasn't welcome on the most important day of her life. I stood there, gripping the edge of the kitchen counter, trying to steady myself. The hum of the refrigerator filled the silence that followed. My heart pounded, each beat louder than the last, and I forced myself to breathe. What do you mean? I finally managed to ask, my voice shaky. She didn't look at me. Instead, she twisted the silver ring on her finger, the one her fiancé had given her, and stared at the floor. It's complicated, Dad, she whispered. But I don't want you there. Please understand. Understand? How could I possibly understand? My daughter, my only child, was shutting me out. I wanted to demand answers, to shout, to remind her of every sacrifice I had made as a single father after her mother walked out. But all that came out was a quiet, broken, "Why?" She wouldn't meet my eyes. Days passed, but her words lingered like a wound that refused to heal. I tried calling, texting, leaving voicemails, but she always kept her distance. Sometimes she'd reply with a short message, polite but cold, as though I was just another acquaintance. I told myself maybe she was stressed, maybe wedding planning had her overwhelmed, but deep inside, I knew this was something more, something darker. I kept thinking back to when she was a teenager. The arguments, the slammed doors, the silent treatment that could stretch for days. We'd had rough patches, yes, but I never thought they'd grow into this estrangement. She had loved me once. I was her hero once. When she was 10, she wrote in a school essay that her dad was the bravest man she knew. And now she wanted me invisible. On the morning of the wedding, I sat alone in my small, dimly lit living room. The suit I had bought months ago still hung in the closet, untouched, with the tag still dangling from the sleeve. I poured myself a cup of bitter black coffee, but it tasted like ash in my mouth. Outside, the world carried on, neighbors mowing their lawns, kids riding bikes. But inside me, time felt frozen. She was about to walk down the aisle, and I was supposed to be nowhere in sight. But fate has a strange sense of humor. I don't even know what pushed me to drive there that day. Maybe it was stubbornness. Maybe it was love. Maybe it was a foolish hope that I could at least glimpse her in her wedding dress. Just once. I told myself I wouldn't go inside. I told myself I'd park a few streets away, sit in the car, and leave before anyone noticed. But my heart didn't listen. My heart never listened where she was concerned. The church loomed tall and grand, its stained, glass windows glowing with soft colors as sunlight poured through. Guests were streaming in, their laughter and chatter spilling into the cool autumn air. I parked at the far end of the lot, my hands gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I watched from a distance as familiar faces filed inside. Her friends, relatives I hadn't seen in years, even neighbors who used to live across the street when she was little. And then I saw her, my daughter, my little girl, now a woman, stepping out of a white car in a gown that shimmered like moonlight. Her veil framed her face, and for a moment, it felt like time rewound, and I was seeing her as the child who used to play dress up in her mother's old wedding veil. My throat tightened, my eyes stung, and I had to remind myself to breathe. She was radiant, breathtaking, and she was no longer mine. I stayed hidden, watching, until I realized my chest ached with more than just pride. It was regret, sorrow, and a gnawing sense of injustice. I couldn't understand why she had cast me aside, why I wasn't allowed to stand by her on this day. I thought I could bear it, but as the church bells began to toll, I found myself walking. Step by step, as if pulled by invisible strings, I moved closer. The ushers eyed me curiously as I slipped inside the back of the church. No one stopped me. I took a seat in the very last pew, far from the front, my presence unnoticed in the sea of guests. The air smelled faintly of roses and polished wood, and the soft murmur of conversation hushed as the ceremony began. The music swelled, and then the doors opened. Everyone turned to watch her glide down the aisle, her arm looped through her fiancé's father's. My heart cracked. It should have been me. Every step she took away from me felt like another nail hammered into the coffin of our bond. The priest's voice rose, solemn and commanding, echoing through the vaulted ceilings. The vows were exchanged, voices trembling with emotion. And then came the moment I will never forget as long as I live. "Who gives this bride away?" the priest asked. There was a pause so heavy it seemed to smother the entire church. Heads turned, slowly, deliberately, eyes shifted toward the back, toward me. And in that instant, I knew. I wasn't meant to be absent. I was meant to be there. I froze in place, the weight of every eye in that church pressing down on me. My chest tightened as though invisible hands were squeezing the air out of my lungs. I hadn't prepared for this. I had convinced myself I would remain unseen, a shadow at the back, content just to watch her from afar. But now the priest's words hung in the silence like a bell tolling only for me. My daughter turned her head. Through the veil, her eyes locked onto mine. There was no anger, no resentment, not anymore. What I saw in her gaze was something I hadn't expected at all: longing. A flicker of pain, and maybe even a silent apology. My heart leaped, but my feet wouldn't move. "Dad," she whispered, her voice carrying farther than I thought possible. Just one word, but it broke me. The guests began murmuring, twisting in their seats, trying to piece together what was happening. Some faces I recognized, some I didn't, but they all wore the same expression: confusion, curiosity, disbelief. I swallowed hard and stood. My legs trembled, every step down the aisle feeling heavier than the last. My shoes echoed against the polished floor, each sound a drumbeat inside my chest. Her fiancé's father stepped aside awkwardly, clearly unsure what to do, his hands falling to his sides. And then I reached her. My daughter lifted her veil, tears glistening on her cheeks. For a moment, the world disappeared. It was just the two of us, standing at the center of everything and nothing. She took my hand, her grip trembling, and pressed it against her chest. I could feel her heart racing beneath the layers of fabric. "I couldn't tell you," she whispered, so only I could hear. "But I needed you here." I wanted to demand answers right then and there, but this wasn't the place. This wasn't the moment. All I could do was nod, my throat too tight for words. My eyes burned, and when I blinked, tears spilled freely. I turned toward the priest and said in a voice that shook but carried through the church, "I give her away." The guests erupted into applause, some crying, some smiling knowingly, as though they had just witnessed a miracle. The priest gave a small nod and continued, but my mind was no longer on the ceremony. It was on her words. "I couldn't tell you." As the vows carried on, my thoughts tangled into knots. Why hadn't she told me sooner? Why had she pushed me away, made me feel unwanted? I searched her face for answers, but all I saw was determination and love. It wasn't until the ceremony ended, until the bells rang again, and the newlyweds stepped out into the golden afternoon light, that I finally got my chance. The reception was held in a grand hall attached to the church. Guests milled about, laughter echoing off high ceilings, champagne glasses clinking. But I lingered near the corner, waiting. I couldn't bring myself to join the joy, not until I knew the truth. Then, through the crowd, she came to me. Still in her gown, veil removed, makeup slightly smudged from tears, she looked younger than she had in years. Vulnerable, fragile. "Dad," she began, her voice trembling. "I'm sorry. For everything." I wanted to tell her it was okay, that none of it mattered. But the ache in my chest wouldn't let me. "Why?" I asked, my voice harsher than I intended. "Why did you tell me not to come? Do you have any idea what that did to me?" Her lips quivered as she tried to hold back tears. I thought I was protecting you." "Protecting me? From what?" She glanced around nervously, lowering her voice. "From them. From the people who didn't want you here. From the whispers, the judgments from Mom." At the mention of her mother, my jaw clenched. My ex-wife. The woman who had walked out years ago, without looking back. The woman who had poisoned our daughter against me more times than I could count. And suddenly, everything began to make sense. She told me it would ruin everything if you came. My daughter confessed. She said people would laugh, that they'd talk behind our backs, that. She trailed off, shaking her head. I didn't know what to believe. But when the moment came, when the priest asked, I realized she was wrong. I needed you. Anger and sorrow swirled inside me, but above it all was a fierce, overwhelming love. I cupped her face in my hands, forcing her to meet my eyes. "Listen to me. I don't care what your mother or anyone else says. I will always be here for you. Do you understand? Always." Her tears spilled over, and she nodded, collapsing into my arms. For the first time in years, I held my daughter the way I used to, feeling the weight of her grief, and relief pressed against me. Guests looked on, some whispering, some smiling, but I didn't care. And yet, even as I held her, a dark thought crept into my mind. This wasn't over. My ex-wife had tried to erase me from this day, to make me invisible in my own daughter's life. And she had almost succeeded. Almost. I wasn't going to let her win. Not this time. The music swelled at the reception, violins and laughter mixing into a lively rhythm. But my mind was far from celebration. My arms were still wrapped around my daughter, her tears dampening my suit jacket, when I spotted her. Standing at the far end of the hall, drink in hand, lips pursed in that familiar, judgmental sneer, my ex-wife, Claudia. Even after all these years, her presence had the same effect on me, a sharp pang in my chest, a wave of old wounds tearing open. She was dressed elegantly, as always, her hair in perfect curls, her jewelry glinting under the chandelier lights. To anyone else, she looked like the picture of class. But I knew better. Behind those painted smiles and champagne toasts was a woman who thrived on control, who had once tried to break me and nearly succeeded. And now, she had tried to take my daughter from me. My daughter pulled away slightly, wiping her eyes, trying to regain composure. "Dade, please, not here," she whispered, sensing the storm brewing in me as I glared at Claudia. "I just want to talk," I said through clenched teeth. But Claudia wasn't going to wait for me. She crossed the room, heels clicking like gunshots against the polished floor, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. Guests parted for her without realizing, as though instinctively moving out of the way of a predator. When she reached us, her smile widened, but her eyes, those cold, calculating eyes, locked onto me with pure disdain. "Well," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Look who couldn't take a hint." I felt my daughter tense beside me. "Mom, please," she begged softly, but Claudia ignored her. "You were told not to come," Claudia continued, her voice just low enough to keep it from drawing too much attention, but every word laced with venom. "And yet here you are, making everything about you, as always." Something inside me snapped. Years of silence, of letting her dictate the narrative, came roaring back. "Everything about me," I hissed. "This is my daughter's wedding, and you tried to erase me from it. You tried to erase me from her life. Do you have any idea what that did to her? What it did to me?" Claudia's smirk didn't falter. If anything, it grew sharper. "You've always played the victim, haven't you? Poor little Daniel, abandoned by his wife, raising a child on his own. Do you want a medal for it? The truth is, she doesn't need you. She never did. And I wasn't about to let you waltz in here and ruin her day with your pathetic need for validation." My fists clenched so tightly my knuckles ached. I wanted to shout, to tell her she was wrong, to drag every ugly truth about her into the light. But before I could, my daughter stepped between us, her voice trembling but firm. "Enough," she cried, and suddenly the room went silent. Guests turned, forks frozen halfway to their mouths, champagne glasses paused mid-air. My daughter's face was red, her eyes wet, but her voice carried through the hall. "Mum, stop. This is my day. And I wanted Dad here. I needed him here. You don't get to control this anymore." Claudia blinked, taken aback. For the first time in years, I saw her falter. The mask cracked, just slightly. "Sweetheart, you don't understand." "No." My daughter cut her off, her voice breaking but resolute. "I do understand. I understand everything now. All those years you told me he didn't care, that he wasn't there for me, that he was weak. I believed you. And I hurt him because of it. But today, when I looked back and saw him standing there, I realized I was wrong. You lied to me. You poisoned me against him." Claudia's face hardened, her jaw tightening. She glanced around, realizing every eye in the room was on her. "This isn't the time," she hissed. "It's the perfect time," my daughter replied, her voice trembling but loud enough for everyone to hear. "Because I'm done letting you control me. I love you, Mom, but you don't get to tell me who belongs in my life. Dad belongs, and he always will." Applause broke out, hesitant at first, then swelling until the room thundered with it. Guests clapped, some even cheered, the sound echoing like a wave crashing against the walls. I stood frozen, my throat tight, my eyes burning with pride and grief all at once. Claudia's face turned pale, her lips pressed into a thin line. For a moment, I thought she would lash out, but instead, she spun on her heel and stormed out of the hall, her heels clattering angrily against the floor. The doors slammed shut behind her, leaving an almost eerie silence in her wake. My daughter turned to me, her chest rising and falling with the weight of everything she had just unleashed. And then, without warning, she threw her arms around me again, sobbing into my chest. "I'm so sorry, Dad," she whispered between tears. "I should have trusted you. I should have known." I held her tight, resting my chin on her hair, inhaling the scent of her perfume mixed with salt from her tears. "It doesn't matter anymore," I whispered. "What matters is we're here, together. And nothing can change that." But as I held her, I knew deep down that this wasn't the end. Claudia had walked out, but she wasn't the type to surrender. No, she would come back, more venomous than ever, and I would need to be ready. Because if she wanted war, Then for the first time in my life, I was ready to fight back. The applause still rang in my ears long after Claudia stormed out. My daughter clung to me as though afraid I might vanish again, as though the years we'd lost could somehow collapse into this single moment of reunion. Guests began to return to their meals, conversations picking up hesitantly, though the whispers lingered. Snippets of disbelief, sympathy, even admiration. I could feel their eyes on me, on us, as if they were watching a play unfold. But for the first time in years, I didn't care. She needed me. And I was here. As the night carried on, laughter returned to the hall, though I felt it like an echo from a distance. I stayed close to my daughter, watching her move from table to table, hugging guests, thanking them, glowing in a way only a bride can. But every so often, her eyes would find mine across the room, and she would smile, small, fragile, but real. And each time, I felt something inside me begin to heal. Then, just as I was beginning to breathe again, I noticed it. Out of the corner of my eye, near the entrance to the hall, a shadow lingered. A figure standing half, hidden watching. My gut twisted when I realized who it was. Claudia hadn't left. She was standing just inside the door now, her face carefully composed, but her eyes sharp, scanning the room like a hawk circling prey. She caught me staring and smiled, not warm, not welcoming, but the kind of smile a predator gives before it strikes. My jaw tightened. She wasn't done. I excused myself from the group I had been speaking to and made my way toward her. Guests stepped aside instinctively, sensing tension crackling in the air. When I reached her, I leaned close enough so no one else could hear. "What are you doing here?" I asked, my voice low and edged with anger. Her smile didn't falter. "Watching," she said simply, swirling the wine in her glass, as though this were nothing more than an amusing show. "Enjoying the spectacle of you playing hero." My fists clenched at my sides. "You've done enough damage for one day, Claudia. Leave her alone." Her laugh was soft, chilling. "Oh, Daniel, always so dramatic. You think because she had one emotional outburst, she's yours again? Please. You've been absent for years." I raised her. I was the one who made sure she had everything she needed. "You think you can just swoop in now, on her wedding day, and reclaim her? You'll never win." "She's not a prize to be won," I hissed. "She's our daughter, and you're not going to poison her anymore." Claudia's eyes narrowed, her mask slipping just enough for me to see the venom underneath. "You don't know what you're starting," she whispered. "You think you're strong enough to go against me? You've forgotten who I am, Daniel. I don't lose." She brushed past me, her perfume lingering like smoke, and vanished back into the crowd. I stood frozen, pulse racing, every muscle in my body screaming with rage and dread. This wasn't over. Later that evening, after the toasts and the cake cutting, I found my daughter outside on the terrace, alone. The night air was cool, stars scattered across the dark sky. She leaned against the railing, her gown flowing like a river of silk around her feet. Her shoulders hunched as though the weight of the day had finally caught up with her. I stepped beside her quietly. She didn't turn, but her voice was soft when she spoke. "She won't stop, will she?" The ache in her words cut deeper than any insult Claudia had ever thrown my way. I sighed, resting my hands on the railing. "No, she won't. That's who she is." For a long moment, we stood in silence, the sounds of laughter and music faint behind us. Then she turned to me, her eyes wide and glistening. "I don't know what to do anymore, Dad. She's always been there, always telling me what to think, what to feel, who to trust. I thought I needed her, but today," her voice cracked, Today I realized I've been living in her shadow. I put a hand on her shoulder, steadying her. You don't have to anymore. You're stronger than she wants you to believe. And you're not alone. You have me. Always. Tears spilled down her cheeks, but she nodded, biting her lip to keep from sobbing. Then she leaned into me, her head resting on my shoulder, just like she had when she was a little girl afraid of thunderstorms. I wrapped my arm around her and held her tight. But as I looked out into the night, past the glow of the terrace lights, I couldn't shake the feeling that Claudia was still out there, lurking, planning. She wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. And I knew if I wanted to protect my daughter, truly protect her, I would have to be ready to face whatever came next. The wedding day had given me back my daughter. But it had also lit a fire I hadn't felt in years. A fire for vengeance, for justice. Claudia thought she still held the power, but she was about to learn the truth. I wasn't the man she had left behind all those years ago. I was stronger now, and this time, I wasn't going to let her destroy us. The night stretched on, but I couldn't relax. Even as the music thumped through the reception hall and laughter rose in bursts of joy, I felt her shadow over everything. Claudia's words replayed in my head like a taunt I couldn't silence. You don't know what you're starting. I wanted to believe my daughter, and I had turned a corner, that this day would be the beginning of something new for us. But the truth gnawed at me. Claudia wasn't going to vanish. She would watch, and strike when the moment was right. That's what she did best. After the guests began to leave, and the night dwindled into quiet goodbyes, I walked my daughter and her new husband to their car. She clung to me one last time before they drove away, tears in her eyes, but hope in her smile. We'll talk soon, Dad, she promised. I want you in my life again. I mean it this time. I watched the taillights fade into the night until they were nothing but glowing specks swallowed by darkness. For the first time in years, I felt I had a future with her. But as I turned back toward the church hall, I spotted movement by the side entrance. Claudia. She was leaning against the wall, cigarette in hand, smoke curling up into the cold night. When she saw me, she smirked, flicking the ash to the ground. Touching, she said dryly. Truly. But don't fool yourself, Daniel. This isn't over. I approached her slowly, every step deliberate. Why? I demanded. Why are you doing this to her? Haven't you hurt her enough? Her laugh was bitter, sharp. Hurt her. I gave her everything. You were the one who abandoned her. The accusation hit me like a blow. Abandoned her. I was there every day after you left. I cooked, cleaned, worked double shifts to keep her in school. Held her when she cried at night, asking where you were. Don't you dare stand there and twist it. Claudia's eyes darkened. You think you were some kind of saint. You were weak, pathetic. I left because I couldn't stand living with a man who was too scared to fight for what he wanted. And now you think you can fight me. You'll lose, Daniel. You always do. I stepped closer, lowering my voice to a growl. Not this time. She's mine too. And I'll fight with everything I have to keep her safe from you. Claudia crushed the cigarette beneath her heel, her lips curling into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. We'll see, she whispered before slipping into the shadows and vanishing into the night. Sleep didn't come easily after that. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, memories of the past clawing at me. Claudia's manipulation, her cruelty, the way she had chipped at my confidence until I believed I was worthless. I had let her win once. I had let her convince our daughter that I wasn't enough. But no more. The days that followed were tense. My daughter called me, just as she promised, and for a while everything felt almost normal. We had coffee together, walked through the park like we used to, laughed about memories I thought she'd forgotten. Each time, I saw more of the little girl I had raised shining through, and my heart swelled with hope. But then Claudia started calling too. My daughter told me in hushed, frustrated tones how her mother wouldn't stop, how she filled her voicemail with guilt and venom. She says I embarrassed her at the wedding. My daughter admitted one afternoon, her voice trembling. She says I betrayed her by choosing you. My hands curled into fists. She's trying to control you again. Don't let her. Her tears welled in her eyes. It's not that easy, Dad. She's my mother. Part of me still feels responsible for her. I placed my hand over hers, firm but gentle. She's responsible for her own choices. You're not her puppet anymore. But I knew it wasn't going to be that simple. Claudia had claws in deep, and she wasn't going to let go without drawing blood. A week later, I came home to find an envelope taped to my front door. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a typed message. Stay out of her life, Daniel. This is your only warning. No signature, but I didn't need one. I could smell Claudia in every word. I sat at my kitchen table staring at that note for hours, rage boiling in me like lava. She thought she could scare me into stepping aside the way she always had. But something inside me had changed. My daughter's tears at the wedding, the way she had reached for me, needed me. It had reignited something I thought was long dead. She wasn't just my daughter. She was my redemption, my second chance. And I wasn't going to let Claudia steal that from me. That night, I made a decision. For years, I had been silent, passive, letting Claudia rewrite the story of who I was. But now, I was going to fight back. I didn't know exactly how yet, but I knew this much. Claudia's lies were going to come to light, and when they did, she wouldn't just lose her power. She would lose everything. I started quietly. Like a man gathering coals for a fire he didn't want anyone to see. I could have charged in with fists and fury. But that wasn't my way. Not anymore. I wanted something cleaner, something that would strip her of the armor she hid under. The smiles, the social standing, the little web of lies she'd spun so carefully for years. I wanted the truth to be the weapon, and the truth to be the blade. I called an old friend of mine, Thomas, who used to manage the small hardware store next to Claudia's boutique years ago. Thomas had a way of remembering faces, accounts, odd little details that most people forgot. When I told him what had been happening, he didn't laugh or tell me I was being dramatic. He listened, and then he said, "Bring me whatever you have. I'll see what I can find." What I had at first was mostly anger, memory, and the note taped to my door. Not much. But anger is a good teacher. It pushed me to look harder. I found receipts shoved into the back of drawers, emails tucked between old utility bills, a bank transfer that made no sense. I knocked on the doors of past neighbors, people Claudia had once told lies about, people she'd used and discarded. Most were reluctant, afraid of stirring up drama. A few, though, survivors of her petty cruelties, wanted nothing to do with her anymore and were relieved, almost, at the chance to speak. Thomas, though, did more than listen. He dug. He pulled up old supplier records and matched dates. He found a ledger from a charity fundraiser Claudia had boasted about hosting. She'd called it her greatest triumph. The ledger didn't match her tales of generosity. Payments were rerouted, invoices duplicated, and a chunk of money that should have gone to families in need ended up in an account whose name matched a shell company Claudia had registered under a cousin's name. The deeper we went, the more tangled the web became. When I showed my daughter the first proof, a marked bank statement with her mother's handwriting on a withdrawal order, her face turned ashen. She had always trusted Claudia's stories, the ones painted with charm and theatrical indignation. But paper doesn't lie. The receipts didn't care about charm. The emails didn't bow before charisma. They sat there, black on white, waiting to be read. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked, voice tiny. It was the same question she'd asked at the church that day. But now the stakes were different. I gathered her into my arms. "Because you were a child in the middle of 2 storms. I didn't want to tear the roof off while you were still under it." "But the roof has to come down, sweetheart. It's coming down." We didn't confront her in the public hall or on a stage. We set a trap that was quieter and more merciless: documentation, witnesses, and a single, inescapable meeting. I reached out to a council member who had once praised Claudia at a charity banquet. He agreed to meet after I showed him the proof. A woman who had worked under Claudia's supervision, a soft, spoken accountant named Mira, came forward with scanned invoices and a trembling confession. She'd been ordered to clean up the books and felt powerless to refuse. She wasn't brave until she had someone who would stand with her. The night we laid everything out, Claudia arrived late, wearing the same armor of tailored blouse and confident smile. We had invited a handful of people, council members, a few of the boutique suppliers, and most importantly, my daughter. We sat around a long table, and one by one the truth uncoiled. Thomas explained the ledger. Mira produced the invoices. The councilman read an email he'd once received from Claudia requesting creative allocations to cover a shortfall. The proof was clinical, methodical, and devastating. Claudia's face shifted color through a spectrum I'd never seen before: shock, rage, panic, and finally a brittle contempt. She tried to laugh it off, to charm and redirect, to invent excuses so smooth they would have fooled a gullible crowd. "It was a misunderstanding," she said. "Accounting errors happen." She tilted her head as if pitying our little outrage. But when Mira produced bank statements with the shell company's name, when Thomas matched dates and signatures, when the councilman said he would be forced to open an inquiry, her mask snapped. The veneer of control she kept so carefully shattered like glass underfoot. She lunged into a final attempt to dominate the room with her voice, but the room would no longer listen. People who had once bowed to her smiled thinly now, distance in their eyes where admiration had been. When Claudia finally left, it wasn't in a storm of slamming doors and triumph, as she had once imagined. It was small. A lonely figure walking away under a sodium streetlight, head down, the expensive handbag heavy with the truth. She lost the boutique's key accounts, the charity withdrew support, and a formal complaint began to take shape that would require her to explain more than just poor bookkeeping. People who had watched us as entertainment now watched her as a cautionary tale. The poison she'd injected into our lives began to be extracted. My daughter stood beside me the whole time. When it was over, she took my hand and squeezed it, not like a child clinging for comfort, but like a partner who had chosen her side. "You stayed?" she said simply. "You didn't let her win. I could have asked for more. Apologies, reparations, her admission of guilt. I didn't need those. What I needed was the quiet knowledge of being present, of having stood up when it mattered. That, more than revenge, felt like victory. Life didn't flip a switch overnight. Claudia's absence didn't heal everything. There were awkward dinners, phone calls where silence hung like rain, and nights when my daughter would wake from dreams shaped by remembered accusations. But the tone of our conversation shifted from confusion and guilt to planning and laughter. We built new rituals, Sunday pancakes, a stubbornly bad attempt at gardening, and long walks where we talked about the small pleasures she had kept secret. She let me into decisions again, invited me to school plays, and one spring, she brought me to a small ultrasound appointment where we both cried when we heard, impossibly, a tiny heartbeat. Years later, when my granddaughter took her first tentative steps in my living room, I watched my daughter from across the room. She caught my eye and mouthed, "Thank you." I mouthed back, "Always." Sometimes revenge isn't the point. Sometimes the point is to reclaim what was stolen: trust, time, dignity. We had not only reclaimed those things, we had built something fragile and wonderful from the ruins. The wound Claudia had left would scar, and it would itch at moments, but it would not define us. And on nights, when I still thought about standing in the back of that church, listening as the priest called for "Who gives the bride away," I would smile. Because in the end, when everyone turned to me, I walked forward. I gave her away not out of duty, but out of love. And later, I got the better gift. She came back to me.